Hi, in this tutorial we're going to look at a couple of the common algorithms that are found with arrays. So back in the notes there was a list of common algorithms that you should be familiar with. And some of them are more simple than the others, and I'm just going to demonstrate a couple of them in the demo today. A couple that I think tend to show up in different ways. So the first one is the need to access consecutive pairs of elements. And a couple things that come up with this one. So we're going to just do a quick demo of, let's say we want to count how many times we have like duplicate numbers next to each other. So for example, because 78 and 78 are right consecutive to each other and they're duplicate, that would count. 96 and 96 would count, and then 85 and 85 would count. So I should have 3 pairs of those. So in order to do this, we're going to use a for loop that starts at 0. It's going to go up to test scores dot length. Okay, this is where we're going to be careful, and this is the main reason why I wanted to do this one. We need to make sure that we actually go up to length minus 1 this time, and I'll show you why in a second. So if I want to look at 2 values that are right next to each other, and I'm going to just, before I do that, I'm going to create a counter and I'm going to call it in a row would be the name of my counter. And here I'm going to check to see if test scores bracket I, so that would be the I element, is equal to the one right next to it. So in order to get the one right next to it, we're going to say test scores bracket I plus 1. And that would get the adjacent element. So anytime I want to get an element with the element next to it, I'm going to take I, and then I'm going to take I plus 1. That would indicate those are right next to each other, which brings us to why we needed to go to length minus 1 instead of length. If we were to go to length, when I get to the very last thing here, it would allow me to check 85, and then it would try to go to an element beyond the bounds of the array, and you'd get an out of bounds error. So that's a really important point, and that was the main reason why I wanted to show you this example. So just to finish it up real quick, we're going to say if they are equivalent, then in a row is just going to increment by 1. And then when we're all done, we're just hoping that it should have found 3 sets of numbers that were, duplicate in a row. So this should print out 3 for that, which it did. The other example I'm going to do with you is kind of a simplified version of finding the mode, because technically I could have more than one mode, but we're going to just assume that we only have one. And if I look at this, if you remember, the mode is an element that occurs the most often. So in the example I have here, it appears that 96 occurs 3 times, which would be the most. 78 occurs twice, 85 occurs twice, and then a lot of singletons in there. So this is just an example where we're going to need nested for loops. And I'll kind of declare some variables as we go, but I'm going to need a variable for the mode. I think I need a variable, an extra one for finder. And there's a lot of different ways to do mode. I'm just kind of showing you one. But we're going to go through our array. So int I equals 0, I is less than test scores dot length, I plus plus. And what I'm going to do is pull out an element in the array, and then I'm going to scan back through the array and see how many times that element occurs. So how many matches there are to the element. So I'm going to have a counter that's going to get reset every time. So I'm going to declare it inside the loop. And I need I need something to pull the element out. So here I'm going to set this equal to test scores bracket I. So this is my outer for loop. So the outer for loop is simply going to grab an element out of the array. And then we're going to also have an inner for loop for int j equals 0, j is less than test scores dot length, and then J++. So this is just an example of us grabbing an element out of the loop or out of the array and then comparing it to every element that's in the array again. And in order to do that, you need nested loops. So the first outer loop is to pull the element. The inner loop is to go through and compare it. So we're going to check to see if test scores bracket J is equal to test. That's the one that I pulled in the outer loop. Then the counter is going to increment by 1, and finder is going to equal test. So basically we're saying that if I run across a duplicate score, that we're going to set that as being our potential mode, and we're also going to keep track of how many of those there are. So this one can get a little bit confusing. But the bottom line is I'm just trying to kind of demonstrate how to pull an element and then check it with every element that's in there, and the whole idea of the nested loops. So after the inner loop runs completely, now I need to check, and we need another variable here, max count, set that equal to 0. And we're going to check to see if counter is greater than max count, would mean that we were able to find, more duplicates with that item. Then max count's going to equal counter. And my mode is going to equal finder. I guess I could have gotten rid of finder. I could have just used test throughout here. So I really could have eliminated this variable finder and used test instead, but it's already there. We'll leave it in. Just an example of, as you're going through and thinking through a solution, sometimes your way might not be the best way, but if it's working, a lot of times it's going to be sufficient. So let's just check our work here. I think we might be okay, but we'll check it and make sure. So we would expect to see that, 96 should be our mode. And if it's not, then we'll go back and kind of try to figure out where we might have gone wrong. But it looks like, nope, it did find 96 correctly. So again, to go back, the whole idea is I have an outer loop that pulls one element out of the array, and then I have an inner loop that goes back through the entire array again and checks every element against that element that I pulled out. And that's a common thing that you might have to do for various reasons. So those are 2 algorithms of the list. I know there's a lot more on there. It would take me a lot of time to be showing you every single one, but it's really good to try on your own, to just experiment with, can you write those? Can you come up with those solutions for the different algorithms that are commonly seen?